You pull the wool cloak tighter around your shoulders and step outside the Longhouse door. The snow has been falling since midday, and now in the early evening it covers the ground in a soft, even blanket that muffles every sound beyond the walls. You take your position near the wooden gate that faces the tree line, your boots sinking a little into the fresh powder. The fire inside the Longhouse glows through cracks between the logs, casting thin orange lines across the snow, and through the thick planks you can hear the low murmur of voices, the occasional clatter of a wooden cup, the soft strum of a bone harp played by someone near the hearth. Your job is simple, and you've done it many times before. Watch the darkness, listen for anything unusual, stay awake, and keep the cold from becoming dangerous. The cold is not your enemy, but a companion. You have learned to accept the way you accept the weight of your shield or the creak of leather straps. You adjust the strap across your chest, settle the round shield against your back, and pull your fur-lined hood forward so it covers your ears and the back of your neck. You have stood this kind of watch through rain and through fog, through clear, freezing nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch, and through blizzards that turned the world into a swirling white nothing. Tonight the snow falls at a steady, unhurried pace, each flake landing with a silence so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat if you stand very still. The tree line sits about 50 paces away, a dark wall of pine and birch trunks that disappears into soft grey shadows where the snow filters through the branches. You know every tree in that line from daylight hours, but at night they become strangers, their shapes unfamiliar and their distances uncertain. That uncertainty keeps you alert without making you afraid. You have learned that fear wastes energy and energy keeps you warm. Instead, you let your eyes move slowly from left to right, scanning the edge of the clearing in a steady rhythm that takes about 30 breaths to complete. A fox could cross that edge without your noticing if it moved carefully, but foxes do not harm longhouses, and the chief does not worry about foxes. Behind you, the Longhouse stretches low and long, its roof bowed under a season of accumulated snow that has been packed down by earlier storms. Smoke rises from the smoke hole in the center of the roof, a thin grey column that the wind tears apart before it climbs very high. The smell of that smoke reaches you in waves, sometimes strong with the scent of birch and sometimes faint and almost sweet when the wind shifts. You breathe it in without thinking, the way you breathe in the cold air, and you let the combination become part of the night's texture. Inside that smoke and inside those walls, the chief's family and the other villagers are safe, their bellies full of stew and their hands wrapped around clay cups of warm ale. You know the routine by heart because you live it every few nights when your turn comes. The duty rotates among the able adults, and tonight is your turn to stand in the snow while others sleep or talk or mend their clothes by the fire. You do not resent this. The rotation is fair and the work is honest, and there is a kind of peace in being the one who watches while the rest of the world rests. You shift your weight from your left foot to your right foot, a small movement that keeps your blood moving through your legs. The snow under your boots has packed into 2 shallow depressions, and you can feel the cold seeping through the leather soles despite the thick wool socks you wear. You wiggle your toes one by one, starting with the smallest on your left foot and ending with the largest on your right, and then you repeat the sequence in reverse. This small ritual passes the time and reminds you that your body is still warm where it matters. Your breath comes out in soft clouds that hang in front of your face for a moment before the wind tears them away. You watch those clouds form and dissolve, and you count them without meaning to. 10 breaths. 20 breaths. The snow keeps falling and the clouds keep coming and the night does not change. A branch snaps somewhere in the forest, a single sharp sound that cuts through the muffled silence. You turn your head slowly toward the sound, your hand resting on the wooden shaft of the spear you have leaned against the gatepost. The sound does not repeat, and after a few long moments you decide it was only a branch breaking under the weight of snow. You have heard that sound on every snowy night you have ever guarded, and you have learned that it means nothing except that trees grow old and snow is heavy. Still you wait and listen, your ears straining past the soft hiss of falling snow, past the distant murmur of voices from inside, past the thumping of your own heart. Nothing else comes. The forest returns to its quiet breathing, and you relax your hand on the spear and return your gaze to the slow sweep from left to right. You think about the people inside the longhouse because thinking about them reminds you why you are standing here. The chief is an old man with white hair and a limp from a childhood accident, not from battle as some visitors assume. His wife is a woman who laughs easily and makes the best smoked fish for 50 miles in any direction. Their children range from a daughter who can weave cloth so fine that traders offer twice the usual price, to a small boy who follows you around and asks questions about your spear and your shield and your boots. The other families include a bone carver whose hands never stop moving, a woman who knows every plant and its uses, a quiet man who tends the livestock and speaks only when spoken to. None of them are heroes from the old songs, and none of them would survive a real attack without help. But that is why you stand here with your cloak and your shield and your spear. You stand here so they do not have to. A mouse darts from under the woodpile near the gate, a small grey shape that stops in the middle of the cleared path and sits up on its hind legs. Its nose twitches as it smells the air, and you watch it without moving because some movements might startle it. The mouse seems to decide that you are not a threat, and it scurries toward the base of the longhouse wall, where a gap between the logs offers a way inside. You smile beneath your wool scarf, a small private smile that no one sees. The mouse will find warmth and maybe a dropped crumb, and tomorrow someone will complain about the mice, and life will continue in its small and predictable way. You like the predictability. It means no one is in danger, no one is afraid, no one is crying or bleeding or running through the snow with a torch. Predictable nights are good nights, even when they are cold. The snow begins to fall a little harder, the flakes growing larger and softer, so they drift down like feathers from a torn pillow. You hold out your mitten and let the snow land on the wool, watching each flake melt slowly into a dark spot before the next one lands, and the next one, and the next one. Soon your mitten is covered in tiny dark spots, and you shake it clean and start again. This is not a useful activity, and it does not make you a better guard, but it passes the time, and it keeps your hands busy while your eyes continue their slow scanning. You have learned that idle hands are not a problem, as long as the eyes and ears stay sharp. The chief's wife once told you that the best guards are the ones who can stay calm during the quiet hours, the ones who do not invent dangers to fight or ghosts to fear. You have tried to be that kind of guard, and on nights like this, you think you have succeeded. The wind picks up for a few minutes, swirling the snow into small eddies that dance across the clearing before collapsing. You turn your face away from the wind, letting your hood take the brunt of it, and you wait for the gust to pass. It always passes. The wind in this valley has patterns like everything else, and you have learned those patterns the way you have learned the way the snow falls, and the way the trees creak, and the way the smoke rises. A strong wind from the north means colder temperatures and clearer skies after a few hours. A wind from the south brings wetter snow and sometimes rain even in winter. Tonight the wind is from the northwest, a dry wind that stings your cheeks but does not carry the promise of a thaw. You are glad for that. Wet snow soaks through wool faster than dry snow, and a wet guard is a cold guard, and a cold guard is a tired guard, and a tired guard makes mistakes. You check the sky through the gaps in the snowfall. The clouds are thick and low, a uniform grey that hides the moon and the stars completely, so the only light comes from the longhouse cracks and from the snow itself reflecting that faint orange glow. This kind of darkness feels softer than a clear night's darkness, more enclosing and more private. You cannot see the tree line as clearly now, because the heavier snow blurs the edges of everything, turning the world into a series of suggestions rather than solid shapes. You do not mind this because the snow also muffles sound more completely, so you would hear anyone approaching long before you saw them, and hearing is more reliable than seeing on a night like this. A branch crackling under a boot carries farther than a shadow moving between trees, and your ears are as well trained as your eyes. You hear the longhouse door open behind you, and you turn to see the chief's wife stepping out with a clay cup in her hands. She has wrapped a woolen scarf around her face so only her eyes show, and she walks carefully through the snow to where you stand. She does not speak, but simply holds out the cup, and you take it with both mittened hands. The broth inside is warm and salty, made from the bones of the lamb they ate 3 days ago, and you drink it slowly, because drinking too fast would waste the warmth. The liquid spreads through your chest and down into your stomach, and for a few minutes you feel almost warm again. You hand the empty cup back to her, and she nods once before turning and walking back to the door. She does not say good night or offer encouragement, because she does not need to. The broth is her way of saying thank you, and your silence is your way of saying you understand. The door closes behind her, and the wedge of orange light disappears, and you are alone again with the snow and the darkness and the slow passing of time. You settle back into your position near the gate, your weight balanced evenly, your eyes resuming their slow sweep from left to right. The snow continues to fall at the same unhurried pace, and the forest continues to breathe its quiet breath, and the Longhouse continues to hum with the distant sounds of people living their small and ordinary lives. You think about nothing in particular, because thinking too much makes the hours feel longer. Instead, you focus on the present moment, the cold against your cheeks, the weight of the shield on your back, the smooth wood of the spear shaft under your hand, the soft hiss of snow landing on snow. This moment stretches into the next moment and the next moment, and time becomes a river that flows without hurry toward the dawn. You are a guard watching the Longhouse during a snowstorm, and for now, that is the only thing you need to be. You have stood this watch many times before, so you know that the first hour is the hardest, because your body still remembers the warmth of the hearth and wants to return to it. The broth the chief's wife brought has settled warmly in your stomach, but that warmth will fade within an hour, and then you will have only your wool and your furs and your own moving blood to keep the cold from finding its way inside your bones. You shift your weight from one foot to the other in a slow rhythm that takes about 10 seconds per shift, and this small movement keeps your muscles from stiffening while also giving your mind a simple pattern to follow. The snow has muffled every sound beyond the Longhouse so thoroughly that the world feels smaller and softer than it does on clear nights, when sounds carry for miles across the frozen valley. A thin layer of frost has formed on the fur lining of your hood, where your breath is condensed and frozen, and you brushed away with the back of your gloved hand, watching the tiny ice crystals fall onto the snow at your feet, where they disappear among the larger flakes. You think about the small things that make this duty bearable, not because you need to cheer yourself up, but because naming them helps the time pass more smoothly. The way the snow reflects any sliver of moonlight or starlight, even through cloud cover, turning the darkness into something soft and grey instead of harsh and black. The occasional distant call of an owl somewhere in the forest, a sound so low and regular that it becomes almost like a heartbeat for the night. The knowledge that relief will come before dawn, that someone else will take this position, and you will go inside and sit by the fire until your toes tingle back to warmth and your eyelids grow heavy. These are not grand comforts, but they are real comforts, and you hold on to them the way you hold on to the wooden shaft of your spear. You count your breaths, not because you must, but because counting gives the mind something to hold on to when the darkness stretches ahead without landmarks. 1 breath in, 2 breaths out, 3 breaths in, 4 breaths out. The numbers climb slowly, and you let them climb without hurrying. 20 breaths, 30 breaths, 40 breaths. Each breath draws cold air through your wool scarf, warming it slightly before it reaches your lungs, and each exhale sends a small cloud of vapor into the night where the wind tears it apart. You have learned that slow breathing keeps you calmer than fast breathing, and a calm guard is an alert guard because panic narrows the vision and speeds up the heart and makes every shadow look like a threat. The snow continues to fall at the same unhurried pace, and you watch it pile on the branch of a nearby pine until the branch bends under the weight and releases its load in a soft white cascade that patters against the lower branches and the ground. That cascade of snow from the pine branch happens every few minutes on a night like this, and you've come to anticipate it without really thinking about it. The branch hangs at a certain angle, and the snow accumulates at a certain rate, and after a certain number of flakes the branch can hold no more. You could calculate the interval if you wanted to, but you prefer to let it surprise you instead. The sound is soft and somehow satisfying, a reminder that even the heavy snow does not stay heavy forever, that things change and fall and settle into new shapes. You watch the branch spring back up after the snow slides off, already beginning to collect a new load, and you wonder how many times it will bend and release before the storm ends. Probably dozens, perhaps hundreds, each one a small event in the larger quiet of the night. You have learned to read the snow the way a hunter reads tracks or a sailor reads clouds. The size of the flakes tells you something about the temperature. Large, soft flakes mean the air is relatively warm, close to freezing, while small, hard flakes mean the temperature has dropped and the storm might be ending. Tonight the flakes started small and hard, but have grown larger and softer over the past hour, so the temperature is rising slightly even though it still feels bitterly cold to your exposed cheeks. This rise in temperature might mean the storm will continue for several more hours, or it might mean the wind is shifting to come from a different direction. You cannot predict which, and you do not need to predict, because your duty does not change regardless of what the snow does. You simply watch and wait and keep your body warm enough to stay awake. A voice from inside the Longhouse rises briefly above the general murmur, someone telling a story or making a joke that makes several people laugh. The laughter is warm and rough, the kind of laughter that comes from people who have eaten well and drunk enough and feel safe in their shelter. You cannot make out the words, but you do not need to because the tone tells you everything. These are people who trust you to keep watch, who do not lie awake worrying about what might come out of the forest, who sleep or talk or mend their clothes without looking over their shoulders. That trust is a responsibility, but it is also a gift because it means you are doing your job well enough that they do not have to think about it. The best guard is the one people forget is there until they need him, and on a night like this, they do not need him because nothing is happening and nothing will happen. You pull your hood forward a little more so the fur rim sits lower on your forehead, blocking the wind that tries to sneak in through the gap above your eyes. The fur is old but still thick, taken from a wolf your uncle trapped 3 winters ago, and it holds warmth better than the wool of your cloak. Your mother sewed this hood for you before you left home, and you remember her fingers working the leather thongs that attach the fur to the wool, her face lit by the fire in your childhood longhouse. That memory comes to you unbidden, and you let it stay because memories are like the snowflakes. They fall when they want to, and you do not push them away. You remember the smell of that longhouse, different from this one, but similar enough, the smell of smoke and wool and dried fish and leather. You remember your father telling you that a guard must learn to be comfortable with boredom, that excitement means something has gone wrong, that the best nights are the ones you forget as soon as they end. Your father was right about that, as he was right about most things concerning the watch. He stood guard for 20 years before a bad knee forced him to stop, and he never once saw anything more dangerous than a lost sheep or a curious bear that wandered away when he shouted. His nights were long and cold and uneventful, exactly the kind of nights you are having now, and he used to say that each uneventful night added a small blessing to the village. You think about that as you watch the snow pile on the pine branch again, the soft cascade of white falling through the dim orange light from the Longhouse cracks. This is a blessing, this quiet, this absence of alarm, this simple duty that asks nothing more than your presence and your patience. You check your shield to make sure the leather strap has not loosened, a habit you developed during your first year of guard duty, when a poorly fastened strap let the shield slip down your back and bang against your heels as you walked. The strap is tight, and the shield sits squarely between your shoulder blades, its wooden curve fitting comfortably against your spine. The shield is not large, perhaps 2.5 feet across, painted with a simple pattern of interlocking lines that your brother helped you design. The paint is chipped in a few places and the iron boss in the center shows spots of rust, but the wood is sound and the leather binding around the edge is still strong. You've never had to use this shield in anger, and you hope you never will. It hangs on your back like a promise you do not want to keep. The Longhouse door opens again, and this time it is the small boy who follows you around, the chief's youngest son. He stands in the doorway for a moment, blinking against the cold and the falling snow, and then he runs across the cleared path to where you stand. His feet are bare and his tunic is thin, and you can see him shivering even before he reaches you. He holds out a small leather pouch and says something you cannot hear over the wind. You crouch down so your face is level with his, and he repeats himself, saying that his mother sent him with dried meat in case you get hungry. You take the pouch and thank him, and you tell him to run back inside before his feet freeze. He grins and runs back, his bare feet leaving dark prints in the snow that will fill within minutes. The door closes behind him, and you tuck the pouch inside your cloak where your body warmth will keep the meat from freezing solid. The dried meat is a kindness, and you appreciate it even though you are not hungry yet. You will eat it in a few hours when your energy starts to flag, and the salt and fat will help keep you warm. For now, you simply let the pouch rest against your chest, a small lump of warmth and the promise of later sustenance. You return to your slow shifting from foot to foot, your eyes scanning the tree line, your ears listening past the hiss of falling snow. The forest has grown even quieter than before, the owl having stopped its calling and the branches having settled into their frozen positions. You hear only the snow, and your own breathing, and the distant murmur of the Longhouse behind you. This is the deep quiet of a winter night, the kind of quiet that makes some people uneasy, because it feels like the world is holding its breath. You have learned to like that feeling because it means nothing is moving except the snow. And you watch a single snowflake fall from the sky and land on the fur of your mitten, and you watch it melt slowly, each crystal turning to water and soaking into the wool. You wonder how many snowflakes have fallen on your mittens over the years, how many have melted against your skin or your clothes or your shield, how many have landed on the Longhouse roof or in the forest or on the backs of the deer that sleep somewhere beyond the tree line. That number is too large to imagine, so you stop trying and simply watch the next flake land and melt, and the next one after that. Each flake is different, or so you have heard, though you cannot tell the difference with your eyes. They all look like tiny white specks to you, and that sameness is part of what makes the snow so calming. It does not ask you to notice its variations or admire its beauty. It simply falls, and you simply watch. Your toes have started to feel stiff, despite the wiggling, so you stamp your feet gently against the packed snow, one then the other, then both together. The stamping sends a small vibration up through your legs and into your spine, and the movement pushes a little more blood into your feet. You repeat the stamping every few minutes, a soft thump, thump, thump that does not carry far because the snow absorbs the sound. The chief would not mind the noise even if he heard it. He understands that a guard must move to stay warm, and a warm guard is an awake guard, and an awake guard is a useful guard. You think about the chief sitting by the fire in his high-backed chair, his bad leg stretched out toward the flames, a cup of warm ale in his hand. He is probably telling one of his long stories about the old days, stories you've heard so many times that you could recite them in your sleep. That thought almost makes you smile. The sky has not changed in any way you can measure. Still the same uniform grey of cloud cover, still no moon or stars, still the same soft diffusion of the Longhouse light across the snow. But you know that time is passing because the sounds from inside have grown softer and more spaced out. The laughter has stopped, and the murmur of voices has dropped to a low rumble with long silences between sentences. Some of the villagers have gone to their sleeping benches, and only the night owls remain by the fire, the ones who prefer the quiet of the late hours to the bustle of the early evening. You recognize the rhythm because you have lived through it many times before. First the children fall asleep, then the older adults, then the young adults, one by one, until only the storytellers and the insomniacs remain. Eventually even they will find their benches, and the Longhouse will fall silent except for the crackle of the fire and the breathing of sleeping people. You will still be standing here when that happens, your cloak covered in a thin layer of fresh snow that you brush off every so often. Your breath coming in steady clouds, your eyes moving slowly across the dark tree line. The snow will keep falling, and the pine branch will keep bending and releasing its load, and the owl might return or might not, and the mouse might make another dash from the woodpile to the wall, or might stay in its warm nest under the logs. None of this matters, in the way that battles or storms or famines matter, but it matters in a smaller way, because it is the texture of a quiet night, the fabric of a duty done well, the shape of a life lived without drama or fear. You are a guard watching the Longhouse during a snowstorm, and for now, that is enough. The weight of these quiet hours rests on your shoulders like the snow on the pine branch, and like the pine branch you bend but do not break, and like the pine branch you will release your load when the time comes. A child laughs somewhere inside the Longhouse, a bright sound that lasts only a moment before being swallowed by the heavier tones of adults' conversation, and you turn your head slightly toward the wall as if you could see through the logs to the source of that laughter. The laugh is followed by a shush from an older voice, probably the child's mother telling him to settle down because others are trying to sleep, and then you hear the soft thump of small feet being put firmly on the floor. You have heard this same sequence on many nights. The way children resist bedtime even when they are exhausted, the way parents gently insist, the way the whole Longhouse seems to sigh and settle deeper into the evening. These sounds remind you that life continues warmly behind you, and that knowledge is a kind of fuel that burns slowly throughout your watch. You hear the scrape of a bench being moved across the packed earth floor, a rough sound that tells you someone is rearranging the seating near the fire. Then comes the clink of iron on clay, someone stirring a pot or setting down a cup, followed by the rustle of straw bedding being spread near the central hearth where the floor stays warmest through the night. The bedding rustle is a familiar sound, dry and soft, and somehow comforting because it means people are preparing to rest. You imagine the straw being shaken out and flattened by hand, then covered with wool blankets and fur throws, the whole process taking only a few minutes, but producing a series of small sounds that drift through the cracks in the walls and reach your ears as a gentle murmur. Outside, the snow makes its own quiet music that you've learned to listen to the way you listen to the voices inside. The soft hiss of flakes landing on existing snow is so constant that your brain barely registers it anymore, but occasionally a louder sound breaks through, like the groan of a tree branch bending under weight, or the faraway whisper of wind moving through the upper pines where the snow has not yet settled. These sounds are not alarming, they are simply the forest breathing, the same way the Longhouse breathes through its smoke hole and its door cracks and the gaps between its logs. You have stood here long enough to know which sounds belong to the night and which sounds do not, and tonight every sound fits perfectly into its expected place. You listen for anything that does not belong, for a snap that is not wood cooling from the day's warmth, for a crunch that is not snow settling under its own weight, for a rhythm that does not match the slow pulse of the storm. The older gods taught you to listen this way, to let the familiar sounds fade into the background so the unfamiliar sounds would stand out. They told you that the forest makes hundreds of sounds on a snowy night, and that a good guard learns 99 of them, so the 100th one wakes him from any drowsiness. You are not sure you have learned 99, but you have learned enough to know that tonight the forest is speaking its usual language, and you understand most of what it says. The pine branch you've been watching bends and releases its snow again, the soft white cascade making a sound like a handful of flour being thrown against a wall. That sound has become a marker for you, a way to measure time without counting breaths or watching the stars. Since you began your watch, that branch has released its load 7 times, each release separated by roughly the same interval. You do not know exactly how long that interval is, but you know it is long enough for you to scan the tree line 4 times and wiggle your toes twice and think about nothing in particular for a while. The regularity of it is soothing, like the beat of a drum played very slowly and very softly in the distance. A mouse darts from under the woodpile to the base of the Longhouse wall, leaving a tiny trail of footprints that will be gone by morning when the new snow covers them. You see the mouse stop at the wall and sniff at the gap between 2 logs, its whiskers twitching as it decides whether to squeeze inside. You watch it for a long moment, admiring how the small animal moves so quickly and so quietly across the snow without seeming to mind the cold. The mouse has a fur coat that keeps it warm, and it has found a way to survive the winter by staying close to the Longhouse where warmth leaks through the walls and crumbs fall from the tables. You feel a small kinship with the mouse. Both of you are creatures of the boundary between inside and outside. Both of you rely on the Longhouse for warmth and food. Both of you are small against the vastness of the snow-covered forest. The mouse disappears into the gap, and you hear nothing more from it. Inside the longhouse, someone coughs, a dry cough that goes on for several seconds before fading. Then you hear the sound of a spoon scraping the bottom of a bowl, someone finishing the last of their stew before setting the bowl aside for the morning washing. The sounds are so ordinary that you almost do not notice them anymore, but once in a while you pay attention on purpose, reminding yourself that each sound represents a person living a small moment of their life. That person is not thinking about you standing outside in the snow. They are thinking about their food or their conversation or the warmth of the fire. That is exactly how it should be, because your job is to let them not think about the dangers that might lurk in the darkness. The wind shifts direction slightly, and for a few minutes you can hear the inside sounds more clearly as the air carries them through a particular crack in the wall near the gate. You hear a woman's voice telling a story about a fishing trip from last summer, the words rising and falling in a rhythm that matches the storytelling style of this valley. She describes how the salmon were running thick in the river, how every cast of the net brought up silver bodies, how the smokehouse was so full that they had to build a second rack. Her voice is calm and unhurried, and you find yourself listening not because you care about the fishing trip, but because the sound of her voice is pleasant and it helps the time pass. When she finishes her story, several people make approving noises, and then someone else begins a different story about a trading journey to the coast. You wonder how many stories have been told inside this longhouse over the years, how many voices have risen and fallen, how many laughs have echoed off the rafters. The longhouse is old, built by the chief's grandfather when this valley first became a settlement, and the logs have absorbed generations of stories and arguments and songs and silences. On a night like this, with the snow muffling every outside sound, the stories seem to fill the whole world, wrapping around you like an extra layer of wool. You are not inside hearing them clearly, but you hear enough to feel connected to the people behind the wall, and that connection keeps the loneliness of the watch from becoming too heavy. The owl returns, calling from somewhere deeper in the forest, its voice a low hoo that repeats every few seconds. You turn your head toward the sound and try to guess the owl's position based on the loudness and direction. It seems to be about 100 paces to the northeast, probably sitting in one of the tall pines that grows near the creek. The owl calls 7 times and then stops, and the silence that follows feels deeper than before because your ears had adjusted to the rhythm of the call. You wait for the owl to start again, but it does not, and after a while you stop waiting and return your attention to the slow sweep of your gaze across the tree line. A gust of wind shakes the snow from several branches at once, creating a series of soft thumps that sound almost like footsteps. You tense for a moment, your hand gripping the spear shaft more tightly, but then you recognize the sound for what it is and relax. False alarms are common on snowy nights because the snow and the wind and the cold can play tricks on your ears. The trick is to catch yourself before you react, to let the sound finish and then decide whether it was something or nothing. Most of the time it is nothing, and the times it is something are so rare that you have never experienced one. Still, you listen and you watch, because the one time you stop listening might be the one time something actually approaches. Inside the longhouse, the stories have stopped, and the voices have dropped to a low murmur. You hear the clink of a poker being used to rearrange the fire, followed by the crackle of fresh wood catching flame. Someone yawns loudly, a long, exaggerated yawn that makes you yawn in response even though you are not particularly tired yet. Yawning is contagious even across a wall, it seems, and you smile beneath your scarf at the small absurdity of it. You shift your weight to your other foot and watch your breath cloud form and dissolve, form and dissolve, form and dissolve, a steady rhythm that matches the beating of your heart. The snow has begun to fall a little more heavily again, the flakes, smaller and harder than before, stinging your cheeks when the wind blows them directly into your face. You turn your head slightly to the side so the wind hits your hood instead of your skin, and you let the snow accumulate on the fur for a few minutes before shaking it off. The cold has settled into your outer layers but has not yet reached your core, and you know you can maintain this balance for several more hours as long as you keep moving. The small movements, the shifting and stamping and wiggling, are enough to keep your blood flowing and your body warm. You hear the longhouse door open slightly, just a crack, and a hand reaches out to toss a bucket of dishwater into the snow. The water steams in the cold air for a moment before soaking into the white ground, creating a small dark patch that will freeze within minutes. The hand disappears and the door closes, and you are left with the image of that dark patch spreading slowly through the snow. You watch it until it stops spreading, a rough oval about the size of a shield, its edges already beginning to crust with ice. By morning that patch will be a hard, slippery spot that someone will curse when they step on it. But for now, it is just another small change in the landscape of your watch. A young man's voice rises from inside, singing a few lines of a song you half recognize about a sailor who married the daughter of the sea. The song is old and the tune is simple, and the young man has a pleasant voice that does not try too hard to be beautiful. He sings only 4 lines before stopping, probably embarrassed by his own boldness, and someone laughs gently and tells him to keep going. He does not keep going, and the silence that follows is comfortable rather than awkward. You wish he had continued because the song was nice to listen to, but you understand his shyness. Singing in front of others is hard, especially when most of them are older and more confident than you are. The fire inside must be burning low, because the orange glow coming through the cracks has dimmed slightly, and the shadows outside seem darker as a result. You think about the person whose turn it is to tend the fire through the night, probably one of the older men who sleeps lightly and wakes often. He will get up every few hours to add more wood and stir the embers, keeping the Longhouse warm until morning. His work is different from yours, but equally important, because a longhouse without fire is a longhouse of cold and darkness and misery. You and he are both servants of the warmth, just on different sides of the wall. The snow continues to fall, the wind continues to whisper, the longhouse continues to settle into the deep quiet of late night. You have been standing here for several hours now, and your body has accepted the cold as a normal condition rather than an intrusion. Your mind has found its rhythm, moving slowly from sound to sound, from thought to thought, from breath to breath. You are not bored, because boredom implies a desire for something more interesting, and you do not want anything more interesting. Interesting would mean danger, and danger would mean failure. You want exactly what you have: a quiet night, a steady snowfall, a long house full of sleeping people, and the simple duty of watching over them until the sun returns. As the hours pass and the snow continues falling at its steady, unhurried pace, your mind drifts to other nights you have spent standing guard in this same spot, or in spots very much like it. You remember a spring watch 3 years ago, when the air smelled of wet earth and the calls of migrating geese filled the sky from dusk until dawn, their V-shaped formations passing overhead in waves that seemed endless. That night had been warmer than this one, warm enough that you left your hood down and let the rain soak your hair, because the rain was soft and almost sweet, nothing like the stinging ice of a winter storm. You remember how the geese sounded like barking dogs, a strange noise that made you smile every time because it did not match the image of birds flying south. You remember an autumn watch when the wind shook the last leaves from the oaks and the northern lights rippled across the sky in green and purple curtains that shifted and flowed like cloth in a river. That night had been cold, but not bitterly so, and you had stood with your head tilted back for long stretches, watching the lights dance and fade and dance again. The older guard on duty with you that night had told you that the lights were the reflections of shields carried by the spirits of warriors in the sky, but you had heard a different story from a traveler who said the lights came from the sun, breathing fire on the edges of the world. You did not know which story was true, but you knew the lights were beautiful, and that watching them had made the watch feel shorter than usual. You remember a summer watch so short that the sun barely dipped below the horizon before rising again, painting the northern sky in shades of pink and gold that lasted for hours. That watch had been easy because the darkness was more like twilight, and you could see the tree line clearly and the faces of any animals that came to the edge of the clearing. A deer had warped across the open ground about 50 paces from you, its ears turning toward the longhouse, before it decided the building was not a threat and continued on its way to the creek. You had watched the deer until it disappeared into the trees, its white tail the last thing you saw, and you had felt a quiet pleasure at being so close to a wild animal that did not know you were there. Each season has its own kind of darkness and its own kind of silence, and you have learned to appreciate the differences without judging one as better than another. Spring darkness is soft and full of small sounds, frogs and insects and dripping water, while summer darkness is almost an absence of darkness, a prolonged twilight that makes you feel like the day never really ends. Autumn darkness comes quickly and carries the smell of dead leaves and wood smoke, and the winds are restless, shaking the trees and making you brace against gusts that seem to come from every direction at once. Winter darkness is the deepest and the quietest, muffled by snow and slowed by cold, and it demands more from you than the other seasons because the cold is always trying to sneak past your defenses. This winter watch is different from the others because the snow transforms everything into something gentle and rounded, hiding the sharp edges of fence posts and firewood piles, and turning the whole clearing into a single white shape, broken only by the dark rectangle of the Longhouse door. You remember the first time you were given this duty, how your hands shook from cold and nervousness, how the older guard told you to stop watching for threats and start watching the snow instead. He said the snow tells you everything you need to know about who or what moves nearby, because any creature larger than a mouse will leave tracks that take time to fill, and any creature that tries to approach the Longhouse will have to walk through the open where the snow is deepest. You remember his voice, low and calm, the voice of someone who had stood many watches and knew that most dangers exist only in the imagination. You remember learning to read the way snow fills footprints, how a fresh print has sharp edges and a clear shape, while an old print has softened edges and a layer of new snow at the bottom. A track that was made an hour ago looks different from a track made 10 minutes ago, and a track made by a person walking quickly looks different from a track made by a person walking slowly or carrying something heavy. The older guard had shown you examples using his own boots, walking in a circle around the Longhouse while you watched and timed and learned. He had made you guess how old each print was, and you had been wrong many times before you started to understand the patterns. Now you can look at a footprint and know within a few minutes how long ago it was made, and that skill has become as natural to you as breathing. You remember learning to read the way snow builds drifts against obstacles, how a fence post will have a tail of snow on its downwind side and a scoop of bare ground on its upwind side, and how the size of the drift tells you how long the wind has been blowing from that direction. A fresh drift is soft and easily disturbed, while an old drift has a crust that can hold the weight of a small animal but might break under a person's boot. You have used this knowledge many times to figure out whether anyone has approached the Longhouse from an unusual direction, though no one ever has. Still, knowing how to read the drifts makes you feel more connected to the night, more a part of the landscape rather than just a person standing on top of it. You remember learning to read the way snow reflects light from sources too faint for your eyes to see directly, how a patch of snow that looks white in daylight can look grey or blue or even pink under the right conditions. On a clear winter night, the stars and the moon can make the snow so bright that you can see the tree line as clearly as at dusk, while on a cloudy night like this one, the snow takes on a soft grey glow that comes from nowhere and everywhere at once. That glow is enough to see by, enough to notice movement at the edge of the clearing, enough to tell the difference between a bush and a crouching person. You have learned to trust that glow even when you cannot identify its source, because the snow is faithful and the snow does not lie. You think about the older guard who taught you these things, a man named Bjorn who had a grey beard and a missing finger on his left hand. Bjorn had stood guard for more years than you had been alive, and he had seen exactly two things worth reporting in all that time: a bear that got too close to the animal pen, and a traveller who arrived in the middle of the night asking for shelter. The bear had left when Bjorn shouted, and the traveller had been given a bowl of stew and a place by the fire. Bjorn used to say that 99 nights out of 100 were exactly like this one, quiet and cold and uneventful, and that the 100th night was usually just as uneventful, but with a different kind of weather. He said the key to being a good guard was to treat every night as if it were the 100th night, while expecting every night to be one of the 99. You remember one night when you were new to the duty, and you heard a sound that made your heart pound, a heavy crunching in the snow near the woodpile that sounded like footsteps. You had gripped your spear and called out, your voice cracking with fear, and the sound had stopped. Then a shape had emerged from behind the woodpile, and you had almost thrown your spear before you realized the shape was the chief's oldest son, who had gone outside to relieve himself without telling anyone. The chief's son had looked at you with wide eyes and then laughed, a nervous laugh that turned into a real laugh when he saw how pale your face had become. You had laughed too after a moment, and the chief's son had promised to announce himself next time. He never did forget after that, and you had learned to listen more carefully before reacting. That memory makes you smile beneath your scarf, the warmth of the smile spreading through your chest for a moment before the cold reclaims it. You have made mistakes on watch, small ones like that one, and a few larger ones that you do not like to think about, but you have never made a mistake that hurt anyone. The mistakes taught you things that the older guards could not teach, because learning from your own errors is different from learning from someone else's stories. You learned that fear makes you see things that are not there, and that the best response to an uncertain sound is to wait and listen and let the sound reveal itself rather than jumping to a conclusion. You learned that your voice sounds different when you are scared, higher and thinner, and that a calm voice is more likely to make a frightened animal run away or a confused person identify themselves. You remember a night of heavy fog, so thick that you could not see the gate from the Longhouse wall, and you had to feel your way along the logs to find your position. The fog had muffled sounds even more than snow does, turning the world into a grey nothing where you could not tell which direction a sound came from. A voice from inside the Longhouse had seemed to come from the forest, and a branch snapping in the forest had seemed to come from inside the Longhouse. You had stood perfectly still for an hour, afraid to move because any movement might hide a real sound. That night had taught you that sometimes the best watch is the one where you trust your ears more than your eyes, and where you accept that you cannot see everything and must rely on the fact that most things are not threats. You remember a night of freezing rain when every surface became coated in a layer of ice that glittered in the light from the Longhouse cracks. The rain had made the snow crusty and hard, so walking on it created a loud crunching sound that would have warned you of anyone approaching from 100 paces away. You had stood with your back to the Longhouse wall, watching the ice build up on your shield and your spear and your hood, and you had realized that even bad weather can be a kind of ally, because it keeps sensible people indoors. No one with any sense would travel in freezing rain, and no one with any sense would attack a Longhouse in conditions that made every step sound like breaking pottery. That night had been unpleasant, but it had also been safe in a way that clear nights are not. The snow in front of you has accumulated another few inches since you began your watch, and the pine branch has released its load 11 times now, or maybe 12, you have lost count. The small boy's dried meat pouch rests against your chest, still warm from your body heat, and you consider eating a piece, but decide to wait another hour. The hunger is there, but not urgent. A small emptiness in your stomach that you can ignore for a while longer. The broth from the chief's wife has been fully absorbed, and you can feel your body beginning to burn its own stores for warmth, a normal process that happens on every long watch. You are not in danger of freezing as long as you keep moving and as long as the wind does not pick up too much. You remember a night when the wind was so strong that you had to brace yourself against the Longhouse wall to keep from being pushed over, the gusts coming in waves that made the snow fly horizontally and the trees bend like fishing rods. That night had been terrifying for the first hour, but then you had learned to lean into the wind and plant your feet wide, to close your eyes against the stinging ice and simply endure. The Longhouse had creaked and groaned around you, and inside the people had gathered near the fire and sung songs to keep their spirits up, their voices rising above the wind like a second kind of storm. By morning the wind had died down, and you had felt a strange pride at having survived something that had seemed impossible when it started. Every watch teaches you something, even the ones that feel exactly the same as the ones before. You have learned that patience is not the absence of feeling, but the choice to keep feeling without reacting, to let the cold be cold and the darkness be dark and the silence be silent without trying to change any of it. You have learned that your body can do more than you think it can, that it can stand for hours in freezing temperatures and still function, that it can stay awake when every part of it wants to sleep. You have learned that the night is not your enemy, that it is simply a different kind of day, one with its own rules and its own beauty. And you have learned that the snow, for all its cold and all its weight, is a kind of friend because it covers your tracks and muffles your breathing and makes you almost invisible against the white ground. You shift your weight again and stamp your feet and wiggle your toes, and you return your gaze to the tree line where the darkness waits between the trunks. The snow keeps falling, the Longhouse keeps breathing, and you keep remembering. That is the gift of a quiet watch, the space to let your mind wander through other nights and other weathers, to measure your life not in days or years but in the number of times you have stood in the cold and watched while others slept. It is a small life in some ways, but it is yours, and on a night like this it feels like enough. You spend a long stretch of time simply watching the snowflakes because there is nothing else to watch except the dark tree line, and the dark sky, and the dark shape of the Longhouse behind you, and the snowflakes are the only things that move with any regularity. They come in many forms, some small and hard like grains of sand that sting your cheeks when the wind picks up, others large and soft like feathers drifting down from a torn pillow that someone high above is shaking out. The small hard flakes fall faster and make a sharper sound when they hit your cloak, a sound like tiny pebbles tapping on wool, while the large soft flakes drift slowly and land with no sound at all, building up in thick layers that insulate you from the cold as long as you brush them off every few minutes. You notice that the snow does not fall evenly, a fact you have observed on every snowy night, but never really thought about until now. The snow comes in waves, with moments of heavier fall followed by moments of near stillness, and these waves have no predictable pattern that you can measure. Sometimes the heavy fall lasts for only a minute or two, a sudden burst of large flakes that reduces your visibility to just a few arm lengths in front of your face, and then the fall slows to a gentle dusting that lets you see the tree line again. Other times the heavy fall continues for 10 minutes or longer, the flakes coming so thickly that you cannot tell where the sky ends and the ground begins, and you feel as though you are standing inside a white room with no walls and no ceiling and no floor except the snow beneath your boots. During the still moments between waves, when the snowfall slows almost to nothing, you can see farther into the forest than at any other time. The dark trunks of the pines become visible as individual shapes rather than a solid wall, and you can pick out the lighter shapes of bare birches with their white bark glowing faintly in the reflected light from the Longhouse. You can see the edge of the woodpile and the curve of the path that leads to the creek, and you can even make out the individual footprints you made when you first walked to your post, though those footprints have softened and filled with new snow until they look more like shallow depressions than tracks. These still moments are brief, usually lasting no longer than a minute or two before the next wave begins, but they give your eyes a chance to rest and your mind a chance to confirm that nothing has changed at the edge of the clearing. During the heavier falls, when the snow comes down in thick curtains that blur everything beyond a few paces, the world shrinks to just the space immediately around you. You can see your own boots in the gate post and the snow-covered ground at your feet, but beyond that there is only white, a shifting, moving whiteness that seems to breathe and pulse with the wind. You prefer the heavier snow because it feels more private and more safe, as if the storm has wrapped itself around you like an extra cloak, hiding you from anything that might be watching from the forest, and hiding anything that might be approaching until it is almost upon you. The older guards used to say that a heavy snowstorm is the best protection a guard can have, because no one can see you and you cannot see them, and in that equal blindness, the advantage goes to the one who knows the ground and has a warm place to retreat to. You hold out your hand, your mitten already covered in a thin layer of white, and you watch the snowflakes land on the wall. Each flake lands and melts slowly, turning into a dark spot that spreads a little before the cold freezes it again, and soon your mitten is covered in a pattern of dark spots and white wool that looks like the spots on a deer's back. You shake your hand gently, and most of the snow falls off, but a few flakes cling to the fibers and continue their slow melting. You hold your hand out again and watch the process repeat, the same sequence of landing and melting and freezing over and over, each flake following the same path but arriving at a slightly different moment. This is not a useful activity, but it is a calming one, and calming activities are valuable when you have many hours of darkness ahead of you. The large, soft flakes are your favorite kind because they drift down so slowly that you can follow a single flake from the moment it appears out of the grey sky until the moment it lands on your sleeve or the ground. You pick a flake and watch it fall, how it tumbles and spins, how it catches the faint orange light from the Longhouse and sparkles for an instant before continuing its downward path. The flake seems to take forever to fall, drifting sideways with the wind, rising slightly when an updraft catches it, falling again when the updraft passes. You follow it until it lands on the fur of your hood, where it disappears among the other flakes that have already accumulated there. You pick another flake and watch that one too, and then another, and soon you have lost track of time because watching snowflakes fall is like counting sheep, a slow, repetitive activity that lets your mind rest without falling asleep. You notice that the snowflakes are not all the same shape, though you cannot see the individual crystals with your naked eye. Some flakes seem rounder and softer, while others have a more angular look, and the sound they make when they hit your cloak changes depending on their shape and size. The round, soft flakes make almost no sound, just a faint brushing noise that you feel more than hear, while the angular, hard flakes make a distinct tapping sound that you can hear even from inside your hood. You wonder what makes the flakes different, whether it is the temperature or the amount of moisture in the air or something else entirely. But you do not know the answer, and you do not need to know. You are content to observe the difference without understanding it, to let the snow be mysterious in the way that all natural things are mysterious. The wind picks up for a few moments, swirling the falling snow into small tornadoes that dance across the clearing before collapsing. These snow devils, as you have heard them called, are brief and harmless, lasting only a few seconds before the wind drops and the snow resumes its straight downward path. You watch one form near the woodpile, a white column about as tall as you are, spinning and twisting and picking up loose snow from the ground before it suddenly disappears, leaving the air clear and the snow falling normally again. Another forms near the gate, closer to you, and you feel the wind of its passing against your face, a cold gust that makes you blink and turn your head away. Then it too is gone, and the snow continues its gentle descent as if nothing unusual had happened. The forest beyond the tree line is completely hidden now, the wave of heavy snow having reduced visibility to almost nothing, and you cannot even see the nearest pine trunks. The world has become the snow and the gate and the Longhouse wall behind you, and you feel a strange sense of peace at being so cut off from everything else. There is no forest and no sky and no horizon, only the white curtain of falling flakes and the small circle of ground at your feet. You could be anywhere in this condition, standing guard outside any Longhouse in any valley, and the experience would be the same. That sameness is comforting because it reminds you that your duty is not unique or special, that other guards on other nights have stood in similar snow and felt similar feelings, that you are part of a long line of people who have chosen to stand outside so others could stay inside. You hear a sound from the forest, a single sharp crack like a branch breaking, but you cannot tell how far away it is because the snow muffles distance as well as direction. The crack is not repeated, and after a few moments you decide it was probably a branch somewhere close by, maybe the pine branch you have been watching all night finally breaking under the weight of the snow. You listen for the sound of the branch falling, the crash and thump of wood hitting the ground, but you hear nothing except the soft hiss of the falling snow. Perhaps the branch did not fall completely, perhaps it only cracked and is still hanging, or perhaps the sound came from somewhere else entirely and the snow has already covered it. You will never know, and you do not need to know, because a single crack in the forest means nothing on a night like this. The snow wave begins to slow, the flakes becoming fewer and smaller, and the tree line slowly reappears out of the whiteness. First you see the dark shapes of the trunks, then the individual branches, then the snow piled on those branches in thick white mounds. The forest looks different now than it did an hour ago, the snow having changed the shape of every tree and bush, rounding off the sharp angles and filling in the gaps between branches. You have seen this transformation many times, the way a snowstorm remakes the world in its own image, turning the familiar into something strange and new. By morning, when the storm is ended and the sun rises, the forest will look almost unrecognizable, and you will have to relearn the shapes of the trees and the distances between them. You turn your attention to the snow at your feet, which has accumulated to nearly the height of your boot tops. The snow is soft and powdery, not yet crusted over by wind or sun, and you can see the tiny dimples where individual flakes have landed and settled. You stomp your foot gently, creating a deeper depression that fills with new snow within a minute, and you watch the filling process with idle curiosity. The snow falls into the hole from the sides and from above, the edges crumpling inward as the flakes accumulate until the depression is gone and the ground is smooth again. Your footsteps from earlier have almost disappeared entirely, leaving only faint indentations that will be gone within the next hour if the snow continues at this rate. You think about the people inside the Longhouse and what they might be doing at this moment. The fire has probably burned down to embers by now, and someone will need to add more wood soon. The sleepers will have turned over on their straw bedding, pulling their blankets tighter against the cold that always creeps in during the deepest part of the night. The storytellers have lightly fallen silent, and the only sounds inside are the crackle of the dying fire and the soft breathing of people asleep. You imagine the warmth inside, the way the heat from the hearth spreads through the room and rises to the rafters, the way the smoke drifts up through the hole in the roof and dissipates into the snowy sky. That warmth is waiting for you, a reward for your patience, and the thought of it keeps you standing a little straighter and breathing a little deeper. A single large flake lands on your eyelid, and you blink it away, the cold shock of it making your eye water for a moment. You rub your eye with the back of your mitten and blink again until the watering stops, and then you resume your watching. The snow has entered another heavy phase, the flakes coming thick and fast, and you turn your face slightly so they hit your hood instead of your eyes. You can feel the weight of the snow accumulating on your shoulders and the top of your head, and every few minutes you shrug your shoulders to shake it off, a small movement that has become automatic. The snow falls from your shoulders in a soft shower, adding to the pile at your feet, and then the accumulation begins again. You have lost count of how many waves of snow have passed since you began your watch. The rhythm of the storm has become as natural to you as your own heartbeat, the alternating periods of heavy and light fall marking the passage of time in a way that requires no numbers or measurements. You know that the night is moving forward because the snow tells you, because the waves are getting slightly shorter or slightly longer, because the flakes are changing size and shape, because the wind is shifting direction in small increments. You do not need a sundial or a water clock or the position of the stars to know that midnight has come and gone, that you are more than halfway through your watch, that the dawn is not yet close but is no longer impossibly far away. The snow tells you all of this, and you listen. From time to time, someone from inside comes to check on you, not because they worry about your safety, but because the people of the Longhouse understand that a guard who is seen is a guard who is remembered, and a guard who is remembered is a guard who is fed. The chief's wife is the first to appear, her face half hidden by a woolen scarf that has been pulled up over her nose, and she carries a clay cup in both hands to keep the contents from spilling. She walks carefully through the snow, her feet following the path you have packed down with your own pacing, and when she reaches you, she holds out the cup without a word. You take it from her and feel the warmth seeping through the clay into your mittened palms, and you lift the cup to your lips and drink. The broth inside is warm and salty, made from the bones of the lamb they ate 3 days ago, and flavored with leeks and a little dried parsley that must have come from the summer garden. You drink slowly because drinking too fast would waste the warmth, letting the liquid sit in your mouth for a moment before swallowing so you can taste the salt and the herbs and the faint hint of smoke that every drink from this Longhouse carries. The broth spreads through your chest and down into your stomach, and for a few minutes you feel almost warm again, the cold driven back to the edges of your body where it waits for the warmth to fade. When the cup is empty, you hand it back to the chief's wife, and she nods once before turning and walking back to the door. She does not speak because she does not need to. The broth is her way of saying thank you, and your silence is your way of saying you understand. The door closes behind her, and the wedge of orange light that spilled across the snow disappears, leaving you alone again with the darkness and the falling snow. A young boy opens the door a few minutes later, or maybe it is half an hour later, You cannot tell because time has become soft and stretchy in the way it always does during the middle of a long watch. The boy is the chief's youngest son, the same one who brought you the pouch of dried meat earlier, and he has been given the small chore of throwing out the dishwater from the evening meal. He struggles with the heavy wooden bucket, his small arms straining to lift it high enough to clear the threshold, and then he tips it forward, and the water spills out onto the snow in a steaming rush. The water soaks into the white ground and creates a dark patch that steams for a moment before the cold begins to freeze it. The boy gives you a shy wave, his fingers barely visible above the rim of the bucket, and then he drags the bucket back inside and pulls the door shut behind him. You wave back, even though he cannot see you through the closed door, a small gesture that makes you feel connected to the life inside. The door opens and closes several more times through the night, and each time a wedge of orange firelight spills across the snow, making the shadows of the falling snowflakes dance on the ground in patterns that shift and change with every gust of wind. You have learned to anticipate these openings by the sounds that precede them, the footsteps approaching the door from inside, the creak of the wooden latch being lifted, the pause as someone decides whether to put on their boots or run out quickly in their socks. Most people choose to run, their bare feet leaving dark prints that fill with snow within minutes, and you wince a little when you see the prints because you know how cold the wet snow must feel against their skin. But they always run back inside quickly, and the door closes behind them, and the prints disappear, and the longhouse settles back into its quiet rhythm. The door opens wider this time, and two men come out carrying a wooden frame that they set up near the wall to your left. They are building a windbreak, a simple structure of woven branches and wool blankets that will give you some shelter from the worst of the wind for the rest of your watch. The men work quickly and without speaking, their breath clouding in the cold air, and within a few minutes they have erected a low wall that blocks the wind coming from the northwest. One of the men, the bone carver whose hands never stop moving even when he is sitting by the fire, pats you on the shoulder and says something that you cannot hear over the wind. You nod and smile beneath your scarf, and the two men go back inside, leaving you with a new windbreak that already feels warmer than the open air. You can smell the smoke from the central hearth more clearly now, a pleasant smell of birch and pine that mixes with the clean, cold smell of fresh snow. The smoke leaks through the gaps between the logs and through the smoke hole in the roof, and on a calm night like this it hangs around the longhouse in a low cloud that drifts slowly upward and dissipates into the sky. The smell is so familiar to you that you barely notice it most of the time, but now, after hours of standing in the cold, the smell of wood smoke reminds you of warmth and comfort and the fire that waits for you inside. You breathe deeply, drawing the smoke into your lungs, and you let it warm you from the inside the way the broth warmed your stomach. A woman's voice calls out from inside, something about a lost sewing needle, and another voice answers that the needle is on the windowsill where she left it. The first voice thanks the second, and then there is a moment of silence before someone laughs at something you cannot hear. The laughter is warm and easy, the laughter of people who have known each other for years and do not need to explain their jokes. You find yourself smiling again, the smile hidden behind your scarf but still real, because the sound of laughter on a cold night is one of the best sounds there is. It means that even in the deepest part of the winter, even with the snow piling up outside and the wind clawing at the walls, the people inside can still find reasons to laugh. The longhouse door opens again, and this time it is the chief himself, leaning on his walking stick and wearing a heavy fur cloak that must have cost a fortune at the trading post. He stands in the doorway for a long moment, looking out at the snow and the darkness and the forest beyond, and then he limps over to where you are standing. He does not speak at first, just stands beside you and looks out at the same tree line you have been watching for hours. You stand together in silence, two men sharing the same view and the same cold, and after a while the chief turns to you and says that you are doing a good job. His voice is low and rough, worn down by years of telling stories and giving orders and comforting the frightened, and the words are simple, but they mean more to you than any long speech could. You thank him, and he nods, and then he limps back to the door and disappears inside. The wedge of firelight that spills out when the chief opens the door is brighter than usual because someone has added fresh wood to the hearth, and you can see the flames dancing through the gap before the door closes and cuts off the light. The memory of that brightness stays with you, a warm orange afterimage that lingers on your retinas for a few seconds before fading. You blink, and the afterimage disappears, replaced by the soft grey glow of the snow under the cloudy sky, and you return to your watching with a slightly lighter heart. The chief noticed you. The chief said you were doing a good job. That is not nothing. That is something worth carrying with you through the rest of the watch. The sound of a bone harp drifts through the wall, someone playing soft and low, the notes barely audible over the hiss of the snow. The player is practicing a new tune, repeating the same sequence of notes over and over, each repetition a little smoother than the last. You do not recognize the tune, but you like the way it sounds, simple and sad and beautiful in a way that does not demand your attention. The harp music is like the snow falling gently into your ears and then fading away, leaving no trace except a feeling of calm. You listen for a while, and then the player stops, and the silence that follows is comfortable rather than empty. A young woman comes out to fetch more firewood from the pile near the gate, her arms wrapped around a stack of split logs that she carries against her chest. She is wearing a wool dress and the fur vest, and her boots are too thin for this kind of cold, but she moves quickly and does not complain. She piles the logs into her arms one by one, her breath coming in quick clouds, and then she turns to go back inside. Before she goes, she looks at you and says something that you think is an offer to bring you more broth, but you shake your head because you are not thirsty and you do not want her to go to the trouble. She shrugs and goes inside, and the door closes behind her, and you are alone again. The fire inside must be burning well now because the orange glow through the cracks has brightened, and you can see the individual flames flickering behind the gaps in the logs. The light is warm and inviting, the kind of light that makes you want to sit down and stretch your hands toward it and let the heat soak into your frozen fingers. But you cannot sit down because you are on watch, and you cannot warm your hands because your hands need to hold your spear and adjust your cloak and brush the snow from your eyes. So you stand and you watch, and you let the memory of that orange glow keep you company, a small piece of the fire that you carry with you even though you are on the outside of the wall. The door opens one more time, and a young boy comes out with a piece of flatbread in his hand, holding it out to you as if it were a gift. You take the bread and thank him, and he runs back inside before the cold can find his bare feet. The bread is still warm from the hearth, and you break off a small piece and put it in your mouth, chewing slowly so the taste of the grain and the salt lasts as long as possible. The rest of the bread you tuck inside your cloak next to the pouch of dried meat, saving it for later when your stomach starts to feel truly empty. The boy's face was round and pink with cold, and you remember having a face like that when you were his age, running errands for the adults and feeling important because you were helping. He will remember this night for a long time, the night he brought food to the guard in the snow, and that memory will shape the kind of man he becomes. The wedge of firelight from the door has faded now, and the cracks in the wall have dimmed, and you know that someone has let the fire burn down to embers because it is the middle of the night, and no one wants to waste good wood when the coldest hours are still ahead. The Longhouse is gone quiet, the voices and the laughter and the harp music all faded into the soft murmur of sleeping people. You can hear the occasional snore, a deep rumbling sound that comes through the wall from the men's sleeping bench, and the higher whistle of someone breathing through a stuffy nose. These sounds are the sounds of people at rest, people who trust you to keep the night at bay so they can close their eyes and let go of their worries. You stand a little straighter, your shoulders squared against the wind, your eyes scanning the tree line in the same slow rhythm you have used all night. The snow continues to fall, the flakes smaller now and harder, stinging your cheeks when the wind picks up. The windbreak the men built helps, blocking the worst of the gusts, and you can feel the difference in your body already. Your feet are still cold, and your ears still sting where they escape the edge of your hood, but the windbreak has taken the sharp edge off the cold, and you are grateful for the small kindness. The people of the Longhouse look after their own, and you are one of their own, even when you are standing outside in the snow. The smell of wood smoke has faded as the fire has died down, replaced by the cleaner smell of fresh snow and cold air. You breathe in that clean smell and let it fill your lungs, and you feel your mind settling into the deep quiet of the night. There is nothing to do now except watch and wait to let the hours pass one by one, to keep the cold from winning and the sleep from taking you. The Longhouse behind you is warm and full of sleeping people, and that knowledge is a kind of warmth that no fire can provide. You are their guard, their watcher, their sentinel in the snow, and for now that is enough. You know it is around midnight because the sounds from inside have grown softer and more spaced out, with longer gaps between the thump of a foot on the floor or the murmur of a voice raised in sleepy conversation. Most of the villagers have gone to their sleeping benches, curling up under wool blankets and fur throws near the central hearth where the warmth lingers longest, and only a few older people remain by the fire. They talk in voices too low for you to understand, the words blending together into a continuous hum that rises and falls like the wind outside, and every few minutes one of them coughs or clears their throat before continuing. The fire must have burned down to a bed of glowing embers, because the orange light through the cracks has dimmed to a soft reddish glow, and you cannot see individual flames anymore, just the steady pulse of heat that keeps the Longhouse from freezing. The snow has slowed to a gentle dusting, the large soft flakes of earlier replaced by smaller, harder ones that drift down in no particular hurry. Through the gaps between these flakes you can see the stars coming out, pale and distant but sharp against the black sky where the clouds have begun to break apart. The stars are not the bright, crowded stars of a clear winter night, but they are there nonetheless, scattered across the sky like salt spilled on a dark cloth, each one a tiny point of light that has traveled for years to reach your eyes. You pick out a few of the brighter ones and try to remember the names the old storyteller gave them, but the names slip away from you like water through fingers, and you give up trying and simply watch them glitter. A half moon hangs above the tree line, its lower edge just touching the topmost branches of the tallest pine, and its light turns the snow-covered ground into a pale silver field that stretches from your feet to the edge of the forest. The moonlight is not strong enough to cast shadows, but it gives everything a soft, luminous quality that makes the world look like a place from a dream, a place where the edges are blurred and the colors have faded to gray and white and the faintest hint of blue. You have seen this kind of moonlight before on other winter nights, but it never fails to catch your attention, because it changes the familiar clearing into something strange and beautiful, something you have to look at twice to recognize. The clouds continue to break apart, carried by a high wind that does not reach the ground, and more stars appear in the widening gaps until the sky looks like a piece of dark cloth full of tiny holes that let the light shine through. You tilt your head back and look up, your hood falling away from your forehead, and you let the cold air touch your skin while you watch the stars wheel slowly across the sky. The movement is too slow to see with your naked eye, but you know it is happening because the stars near the horizon disappear behind the trees while new stars rise in the east. This is the oldest clock in the world, the turning of the sky above a sleeping earth, and you are one of the millions of people who have looked up at these same stars on nights just like this one. You notice a fox moving along the far edge of the clearing, its red fur almost grey in this pale moonlight, its nose low to the ground as it follows a scent trail that only it can smell. The fox moves with a fluid, unhurried grace, its paws lifting and placing without any sound that you can hear, its tail streaming out behind it like a brush dipped in dark paint. It stops occasionally to lift its head and sniff the air, its ears swiveling forward and back, and then it continues on its way, veering slightly to avoid a patch of deeper snow where a drift has formed against a fallen log. You watch the fox for a long time, not moving, barely breathing, because you do not want to startle it, and you enjoy the simple pleasure of watching a wild animal go about its business without knowing it is being watched. The fox reaches the far corner of the clearing and pauses, its body tense for a moment as it looks back in your direction. You hold absolutely still, your hand frozen on the spear shaft, your breath caught in your chest, and you wait to see if the fox has noticed you. The fox stares for a long moment, its eyes two small points of reflected moonlight, and then it turns and continues into the forest, disappearing between the dark trunks of two pines. You let out your breath slowly, a cloud of vapor that hangs in the air for a moment before the wind tears it away, and you feel a small sense of loss at the fox's departure. It was good to have company, even the silent company of a wild animal that did not know you were there. The half-moon has climbed higher in the sky, its light growing stronger as the clouds continue to break apart, and the snow on the ground sparkles with a million tiny reflections that look like scattered diamonds. You stamp your feet gently to keep the blood moving, the sound muffled by the snow, and you shift your weight from your left foot to your right and back again. The windbreak the men built earlier is doing its job, blocking the worst of the northwest wind, and you can feel the difference in your body. Your toes are still cold, and your fingers are stiff inside your mittens, but the sharp biting cold that made your eyes water earlier has faded to a dull ache that you can ignore. You think about the fox and where it might be going, what it might be hunting, whether it has a den somewhere in the forest with a litter of cubs waiting for food. The fox seemed healthy and well-fed, its fur thick and glossy, its movements easy and confident, and you take that as a good sign for the coming spring. A healthy fox population means plenty of small animals to hunt, which means the forest is healthy, which means the summer hunting and fishing will be good. The old people in the Longhouse pay attention to signs like these, watching the behavior of animals and birds to predict the weather and the harvest and the health of the valley. You are not old enough to read those signs with confidence, but you are learning, and watching the fox tonight feels like a lesson you will remember. The Longhouse behind you has fallen completely silent now, the low murmur of the older people finally fading into the deeper quiet of sleep. You cannot hear any voices at all, only the occasional creak of the roof beams settling under the weight of the snow and the soft crackle of the embers in the hearth. The silence is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat if you stand very still, a steady thump-thump that reminds you that you're alive and warm enough to stay that way. You count your heartbeats for a while, letting the rhythm anchor you in the present moment, and then you stop counting because the numbers blur together and lose their meaning. A shooting star streaks across the sky, a bright line of white light that appears and disappears in less than a second, leaving no trace behind except the memory of its passage. You have seen shooting stars before, and you know that the old people say they are messages from the spirits or the souls of the dead traveling to the next world. You are not sure what you believe about shooting stars, but you know that they are beautiful and rare, and you feel lucky to have seen one on a night when you were standing watch. You make a wish, not because you expect it to come true, but because making a wish feels like the right thing to do when a star falls from the sky, and you tuck the wish away in your heart when no one else can hear it. The moon has moved past the midpoint of its arc and is beginning its slow descent toward the western tree line, though that is still hours away. The stars have shifted too, the constellations you thought you recognized now in different positions, and the sky looks different than it did an hour ago. You have lost all sense of time except for the position of the moon and the stars, and even that sense is vague because you are not an expert at reading the night sky. You know that midnight has passed and that dawn is still far away, and that is enough for now. The exact hour does not matter. What matters is that you were still standing, still watching, still awake. The snow has almost stopped now, only a few scattered flakes drifting down from the few clouds that remain, and the air feels colder than it did when the snow was falling heavily. The cold is a dry cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes your joints ache, and you clench and unclench your fists inside your mittens to keep your fingers from growing too stiff. The fur lining of your hood is crusted with frost from your breath, and you brush it off with the back of your hand, watching the tiny ice crystals scatter and disappear into the darkness. Your beard, if you have one, would be stiff with ice by now, but you do not think about that because thinking about it only makes you feel colder. The fox is gone. The moon is high, the stars are bright, and the Longhouse is silent. You are alone in the way that only a guard on a winter night can be alone, surrounded by sleeping people, but separated from them by a wall of logs and your own sense of duty. The aloneness is not loneliness, not exactly. It is more like a quiet room inside your head where you can hear yourself think, where the only sounds are the ones you choose to notice, where the world narrows to the circle of snow around your feet and the strip of stars above your head. You have learned to value this aloneness, to see it as a gift rather than a burden, because it gives you time to rest your mind even while your body stays awake. You remember a story the old storyteller told once about a guard who fell asleep on watch and woke to find that the whole village had been buried in a snowdrift, with only the smoke hole showing where the Longhouse had been. The guard had to dig for hours to free his family and neighbors, and he never fell asleep on watch again. The story is probably not true, but it serves its purpose, reminding every guard that sleep is the enemy on nights like this. You are not sleepy, not yet, but you can feel the edges of tiredness creeping in around the corners of your mind. You fight it by focusing on small details, the exact pattern of frost on the wooden gate post, the way the moonlight catches the edge of the woodpile, the faint smell of smoke that still hangs in the air even though the fire has died down. The half-moon illuminates the tree line more clearly now, and you can see the individual branches of the pines, the way the snow sits on them in thick white layers, the way the moonlight turns the dark green needles into a soft black silhouette. You scan the tree line slowly, looking for anything that does not belong, any shape that is not a tree or a bush or a pile of snow. There is nothing, just the forest sleeping under its white blanket, the animals tucked into their dens and nests, the birds silent on their branches. The night is as peaceful as any night you've ever guarded, and you are grateful for that peace because it means no one is afraid, and no one is hurt, and no one is crying. You shift your weight again, a small movement that has become as automatic as breathing, and you listen to the soft crunch of snow under your boots. The sound is satisfying in a small way, a reminder that you are real and solid and present in this cold, white world. You think about the people sleeping inside, each one dreaming their own dreams, each one trusting you to keep the darkness at bay. That trust is heavy in a way that has nothing to do with weight, and you carry it carefully, like a cup full to the brim with warm broth. You do not want to spill it, do not want to let anyone down, do not want to be the guard who fell asleep and let the snow bury the village. You will not be that guard. You will stay awake. You will watch. You will watch. You will wait for the dawn. Despite your wool cloak and fur-lined boots, the cold begins to find its way through your defenses in the small places where the wind can sneak past the seams. Your toes feel stiff inside the leather, the wool socks that were so warm at the beginning of your watch now compressed and damp with sweat that has frozen into a thin layer of ice against the inside of the boots. You wiggle them one by one, starting with the smallest on your left foot and moving to the largest on your right, and you feel the joints crack slightly as the movement forces the cold blood through the narrow channels of your feet. The wiggling helps, but only a little. The stiffness returns within a minute, and you have to wiggle again, a constant small battle against the freezing that will not end until you go inside and sit by the fire. The tips of your ears sting where they escape the edge of your hood, the fur trim having shifted slightly during one of your movements, leaving a small triangle of skin exposed to the night air. You reach up with your mitten and pull the hood forward, covering the exposed skin, and the stinging fades to a dull ache as the fur traps a thin layer of warm air against your ears. Your nose is cold too, the tip of it numb and pale, and you rub it with the back of your mitten to bring some warmth back. The rubbing helps a little, and you can feel the blood rushing back into the skin, a tingling sensation that is almost painful, but also reassuring because it means the flesh is still alive. Your breath comes out in thicker clouds now than it did earlier, the colder air condensing more heavily when it meets the warmth of your lungs. Each exhale produces a dense white plume that hangs in front of your face for several seconds before the wind tears it apart, and you watch these plumes form and dissolve with a kind of detached curiosity. The clouds are bigger than they were an hour ago, which means the temperature has dropped, which means the worst of the cold is still ahead of you. You pull your wool scarf higher over your nose and cheeks, leaving only a narrow slit for your eyes, and the extra layer helps trap the warmth of your breath so your face does not freeze completely. You notice that the frost on your beard has grown into small icicles, assuming you have a beard or enough stubble to catch the moisture from your breath. These tiny ice formations cling to the hairs and grow longer with every exhale, turning your lower face into something that looks like a cave entrance in the depths of winter. You could break the icicles off with your hand, but you do not bother because they will only grow back within a few minutes. Instead, you let them hang there, a small weight on your chin, a reminder that the air is cold enough to turn breath into ice. You do not shiver because shivering wastes energy, and energy is warmth. So you clench and unclench your muscles in a slow, careful sequence that keeps the blood moving without burning through your reserves too quickly. Start with the calves, squeezing the muscles tight for a count of 5, and then releasing, feeling the warmth flow back into the lower legs. Then the thighs, the largest muscles in your body, clenching and releasing in the same slow rhythm. Then the stomach, pulling the muscles tight and feeling the warmth spread through your core. Then the back, arching slightly against the weight of your shield. Then the shoulders, lifting and lowering. Then the arms, flexing inside the sleeves of your tunic. This is a trick the older guards taught you during your first winter on watch, and it works well enough to keep the worst of the cold at bay. You also remind yourself that the cold will not last forever, that the sun will eventually rise, that relief will come, and that every watch you complete makes the next one easier because your body remembers the cold and learns to adapt. The human body is remarkable in its ability to adjust to harsh conditions, and you've watched your own body change over the winters, growing thicker skin on your hands and a layer of fat under your skin that insulates you against the freezing air. You are not the same person who stood shivering through that first winter watch. You are harder now, more durable, more prepared for nights like this one. You look up at the stars and try to name the constellations you remember from the stories told around the fire, but the names slip away from you like snow through fingers. There is the one that looks like a plow, or maybe a wagon, and the one that looks like a fish, and the one that the old storyteller said was a hero who was turned into a bear by the gods. You can see the shapes if you squint and tilt your head, but the names will not come, buried somewhere in the back of your mind under layers of fatigue and cold. It does not matter. The stars do not need names to be beautiful, and you do not need to name them to appreciate their steady, silent presence in the sky above you. The half-moon has continued its slow arc across the sky and is now past its highest point, beginning the long descent toward the western horizon. The light it casts is still bright enough to see by, and the snow sparkles with a million tiny reflections that look like scattered diamonds or the eyes of small animals watching from the darkness. You sweep your gaze across the clearing one more time, looking for any movement, any shape that does not belong, and you see nothing except the snow and the trees and the distant line where the forest meets the sky. The night is peaceful, the cold is steady, and your body is holding up as well as can be expected. The longhouse behind you has been silent for a long time now, the sleeping breaths of the villagers merging into a single soft murmur that barely reaches your ears through the thick log walls. You imagine them turned over on their straw bedding, their blankets pulled up to their chins, their faces relaxed and peaceful in the dim glow of the dying embers. Some of them might be dreaming, their eyes moving behind closed lids, their fingers twitching as they run through the events of the day or the hopes for tomorrow. You hope their dreams are warm, that they are dreaming of summer meadows or spring rains or autumn harvests, anything other than the cold that surrounds them outside the walls. Your hands are cold inside your mittens, the wool not as thick as it once was after years of use and washing. You clench your fists and unclench them, the same muscle tensing you have been doing with the rest of your body, and you feel the warmth slowly returning to your fingers. The leather of the mittens is stiff with frost, and you flex your hands to keep the leather from cracking, a small sound like dry leaves rustling that is barely audible over the wind. You think about the woman who made these mittens for you, your aunt who lived in the next valley until she moved south to be closer to her grandchildren. She stitched them by firelight using sinew from a deer your father killed, and she lined them with wool sheared from her own sheep and carded and spun and woven by her own hands. These mittens are warm because she put her care into them, and that care is still present even though she is far away. The wind picks up for a moment, a gust that shakes the trees and sends a spray of loose snow from the branches, and you turn your face away from the blast, letting your hood, take the brunt of it. The gust passes as quickly as it came, and the wind returns to its previous gentle whisper, moving through the pines with a sound like water flowing over stones. You have learned to read the wind on nights like this, to know when a gust is just a gust, and when it is the beginning of a larger change in the weather. Tonight the gusts are random and short-lived, not the sustained winds that bring a new storm or a dramatic shift in temperature. The weather will stay as it is for the rest of the night, cold and clear and quiet, and that predictability is a comfort. You check your shield again, patting the wooden surface with your mitten to make sure the leather strap has not loosened. The shield is still secure against your back, its weight a familiar presence that you have almost stopped noticing. The iron boss in the center is cold against your spine, even through the layers of wool, and you shift slightly to move the boss away from the bone. The wood of the shield creaks occasionally as the temperature drops further, the fibers contracting in the cold, but the creaking is faint and does not worry you. The shield was made by a craftsman who knew what he was doing, and it will last through many more winters before it needs to be replaced. You think about the relief guard who will come to take your place before dawn, a young man named Eric who is still learning the trade of standing watch. He is eager and earnest, and he asks too many questions, but he is reliable, and he shows up on time, and he does not complain about the cold. You will wake him when the sky starts to lighten in the east, and you will hand him your spear and your position, and you will go inside and sit by the fire until your toes tingle back to warmth. That moment seems far away right now, but it is coming, every breath you take bringing it closer. You hold on to that thought like a piece of kindling, a small dry fuel that will keep the fire of your patience burning through the remaining hours. Your stomach growls softly, a reminder that you have not eaten the dried meat the boy brought you. You reach inside your cloak and pull out the leather pouch, your fingers stiff and clumsy as you work the drawstring open. You pull out a piece of dried meat, dark and chewy and salty, and you put it in your mouth, letting it soften against your tongue before you start to chew. The taste is strong and gamey, the taste of the deer that was killed in the autumn and hung in the smokehouse for a month before being cut into strips and dried. You chew slowly, savoring the salt and the fat, feeling the energy spread through your body as your stomach begins to digest the meat. You eat 2 more pieces and then close the pouch and tuck it back inside your cloak, saving the rest for later. The meat has warmed you from the inside, a small fire burning in your stomach that sends waves of heat through your chest and limbs. The cold does not seem quite as bitter now, and you stand a little straighter, your eyes a little sharper, your mind a little clearer. The old guards were right about the importance of eating on a long watch. An empty stomach is a cold stomach, and a cold stomach is a tired stomach, and a tired stomach leads to a tired mind. You thank the small boy in your thoughts, and you make a mental note to thank him properly when you see him in the morning, perhaps by showing him how to sharpen a knife, or by telling him a story from your own childhood. The stars have shifted again, the constellations you could not name, now lower in the sky, and the moon has moved noticeably closer to the tree line. You watch the moon for a while, noting its position relative to the tallest pine, and you try to calculate how many hours until dawn, based on the moon's descent. It is not an exact science, but you have done it enough times to have a rough sense. The moon will set in about 3 hours, and dawn will come about an hour after that. 4 more hours, maybe 5, and then your watch will be over. The number seems large and small at the same time, large enough to feel daunting, small enough to be manageable. You can stand here for 4 more hours. You have stood here for longer on other nights, and you will stand here for longer on nights still to come. The cold continues to creep in, finding new gaps in your armor, new places where the wool has worn thin or the fur has matted down. Your left hip is cold where your cloak has shifted, exposing a patch of your tunic to the wind, and you pull the cloak back into place, tucking the edge under your belt to hold it secure. The back of your neck is cold too, a small triangle of exposed skin where your hood does not quite meet the collar of your tunic, and you pull the hood lower and tighten the drawstring until the fur presses against your forehead. The adjustments help, but they do not solve the problem, because the problem is not your clothing, but the air itself. the deep cold that seeps through everything eventually. You stamp your feet again, harder this time, the thump thump echoing off the longhouse wall and disappearing into the snow. The stamping sends a jolt through your legs and up into your spine, and you feel the blood rush into your feet, warm and painful at the same time. You repeat the stamping every minute or so, a steady rhythm that keeps the worst of the numbness at bay. Your toes are still cold, but they are not frozen, and that is what matters. As long as you can feel them, as long as you can wiggle them, as long as the skin is pink and not white, you will be fine. You have seen frostbite before, on a trader who came through one winter with black fingers, and you have no desire to experience it yourself. The half-moon has reached the edge of the tree line, its lower curve just touching the topmost branches of the pines, and you watch as it begins to slip behind the dark wall of the forest. The light dims slowly as the moon disappears, the silver glow fading from the snow, the shadows deepening, the stars growing brighter in the sudden darkness. Within a few minutes the moon is gone, hidden behind the trees, and the clearing is lit only by the stars and the faint orange glow from the longhouse cracks. The darkness feels different now, deeper and more complete, and you blink a few times to let your eyes adjust to the change. You can still see the tree line, but just barely, the trunks now dark shapes against a slightly less dark sky. The cold seems to deepen with the darkness, as if the moon had been holding some small warmth that is now gone. You pull your cloak tighter and clench your muscles in the slow sequence again, calves to thighs to stomach, to back to shoulders to arms. The movement warms you, but only for a moment, and then the cold returns, patient and persistent. You remind yourself that the cold is not your enemy, that it is simply a part of the night, that you have survived colder nights and will survive this one too. The sun will rise, the fire will be rekindled, and you will be inside, warm and safe, and done with your duty. Until then, you watch and you wait, and you keep the cold at bay as best you can. This is the hardest part of any watch, the hours before dawn when your body wants to sleep more than anything else in the world, and your eyes want to close and the darkness feels deeper than it did at midnight. The snow has stopped falling completely now, the last few flakes having drifted down about an hour ago, and the sky has cleared to a deep velvet black dotted with hundreds of stars that seem to burn brighter than before because there is no cloud cover to soften their light. The temperature has dropped even further, the kind of cold that makes your breath freeze in the air and your nostrils stick together when you inhale, and you can hear the snow beneath your feet creaking with cold every time you shift your weight, because the crystals have frozen into a hard crust that groans under pressure. You fight the drowsiness that creeps in around the edges of your consciousness by focusing on small details, the tiny things that you would not notice during the daytime or even earlier in the night when your mind was fresher. The exact pattern of frost on the wooden fence post near the gate, how the ice crystals have formed in branching shapes that look like ferns or the veins on a leaf. The way a particular pine branch curves under its load of snow, the branch having bent so far that the tip almost touches the branch below it, creating a tunnel of white that a small animal could crawl through. The tiny crystals that sparkle on the fur trim of your mittens, each one catching the starlight and throwing back a tiny flash of silver before disappearing as your hand moves. You remind yourself that dawn is coming, that the sky in the east will begin to lighten soon, that the first bird will call from somewhere in the forest, that the smoke from the longhouse will change from orange to pink to gold as the sun rises behind the trees. These reminders are not desperate or anxious, they are simply facts you hold in your mind like stones in your pocket, small weights that keep you grounded in the certainty that this night will end. Every night ends eventually, no matter how cold or how long, and this night is no different from any other in that regard. The sun has never failed to rise, not in all the years you have been alive, or in all the years your parents were alive, or in all the years the storytellers can remember. And it will not fail today. You take a sip from the water skin tucked inside your cloak, but the water has started to freeze, and you only get a few drops before the skin stiffens and the opening becomes blocked by a thin film of ice. You squeeze the skin gently, trying to break the ice, but the leather is too stiff and you do not want to tear it, so you tuck it back inside your cloak and let your body warmth thaw it slowly. You are not thirsty enough to fight with the frozen water skin. The thirst is there, but it is a background feeling, easy to ignore compared to the cold and the tiredness. You will drink when the water thaws, or you will drink when you go inside, whichever comes first. The longhouse behind you has been silent for so long that you have almost forgotten there are people inside. 30 or 40 souls sleeping under wool blankets and fur throws, their breath rising and falling in the same slow rhythm. Every few minutes you hear a snore, a deep rumbling sound that comes through the wall from the men's sleeping bench, or a soft sigh from someone turning over in their sleep. These sounds are faint, but they are there, proof that life continues behind the wall, that you are not alone in the darkness, even though you feel alone. You listen to the snoring for a while, letting the sound anchor you in the present moment, and you find that the rhythm of the snoring is almost as calming as the rhythm of your own breathing. The stars have shifted noticeably during the past hour, the constellations you could not name now lower in the western sky, while new stars have risen in the east. The half-moon has set completely, hidden behind the tree line, and will not return until tomorrow night, so the only light comes from the stars and the faint glow of the longhouse embers. The starlight is enough to see by once your eyes have adjusted, enough to make out the shapes of the trees and the woodpile and the path to the creek, but just barely. Everything is grey and silver and shadow, the colours drained away by the darkness, and the world looks like a charcoal drawing or a memory of itself. You stamp your feet again, the motion automatic now, and you hear the snow creak under your boots, a sound like old wood bending. The cold has settled into your bones in a way that feels permanent, as if you will never be warm again, but you know that is not true because you have felt this way before, and the warmth always returns. You clench and unclench your muscles in the slow sequence, calves to thighs to stomach to back to shoulders to arms, and you feel the blood moving sluggishly through your body, pushed by a heart that is tired but still strong. The muscle clenching helps, but not as much as it did earlier. Your body is running low on the energy it needs to generate heat, and the last few hours will be a test of how much you have left. You think about the relief guard, Eric, who will come to take your place when the sky starts to lighten. He is probably asleep right now, curled up on his sleeping bench, dreaming of whatever young men dream about. You awaken gently, touching his shoulder and saying his name in a low voice, and he will sit up and rub his eyes and pull on his boots and his cloak and his mittens. He will complain about the cold, because he always complains about the cold, and you will hand him your spear and point him toward the gate, and then you will go inside and find a spot near the embers where you can sit and rest. That moment is still some distance away, but it is coming, and the knowledge of it is a small fire that burns in your chest. A sound comes from the forest, a soft crunching that might be footsteps or might be the snow settling under its own weight. You turn your head slowly toward the sound, your hand resting on the spear shaft, your eyes straining to see through the starlit darkness. The sound stops, and you wait, your breath held in your chest, your heart beating a little faster. Nothing moves, nothing sounds, and after a long moment you decide it was probably a clump of snow falling from a branch, the same thing you have heard 100 times tonight. You relax your hand on the spear and let your breath out slowly, and you return your gaze to the sweep of the clearing. The eastern sky has not yet begun to lighten, but you know it will soon, because the stars in that direction look slightly dimmer than they did an hour ago. Or maybe that is your imagination, your desire for the dawn making you see changes that are not there yet. You cannot trust your eyes completely at this hour. Fatigue plays tricks on the mind, making shadows move and stars flicker, and sounds seem closer than they are. The trick is to acknowledge the tricks, to recognize when your mind is playing games with you, and to wait for confirmation before reacting. The older gods taught you that too, and you have learned to trust their wisdom even when you cannot trust your own senses. You pull the last piece of dried meat from the pouch and put it in your mouth, chewing slowly, savoring the salt and the fat. The meat is tough and chewy, and it takes a long time to break down enough to swallow, but that is good because it gives your mouth something to do and your stomach something to work on. The energy from the meat spreads through your body slowly, a gentle warmth that does not chase away the cold but takes the edge off it. You tuck the empty pouch back inside your cloak, saving it to return to the boy in the morning, and you lick the salt from your lips. A small pleasure that feels larger than it is because pleasures are rare in the hours before dawn. The longhouse seems to shift slightly, a creaking sound that comes from the roof as the snow settles and the beams adjust to the weight. The sound is loud in the silence, a long, slow groan that lasts for several seconds before fading. You look up at the roof, half expecting to see the snow sliding off, but the roof holds, and the snow stays in place, and the longhouse settles back into its frozen stillness. These sounds are normal on a cold night, the building contracting as the temperature drops, the wood fibers shrinking and pulling against the pegs that hold them together. The longhouse has stood through dozens of winters, and it will stand through this one too. Your eyelids feel heavy, the weight of sleep pressing down on them, and you blink rapidly to keep them open. You try a trick the older guards taught you, looking up at the stars and then down at the snow, and then up at the stars again, the change in focus keeping your eyes from growing too comfortable. The trick works for a while, but the tiredness is deep now, a physical force that pulls at your whole body, not just your eyes. You shift your weight again, deliberately making the movement larger than before, and you let the cold air sting your cheeks through the gap in your scarf. The sting helps, a small sharp pain that cuts through the fog of fatigue. You think about the people inside the longhouse and what they will do when they wake up. The chief's wife will stir the embers and add fresh wood, and the fire will blaze up and warm the room. Someone will start cooking porridge, the smell of oats and dried fruit filling the longhouse. The children will wake slowly, rubbing their eyes and complaining about the cold, and their mothers will tell them to put on their tunics and sit closer to the fire. The men will talk about the snow and how deep it is, and whether the paths to the animal pens need to be cleared. Life will resume its ordinary rhythm, and you will be part of that rhythm again, sitting by the fire with a bowl of warm porridge in your hands. The eastern sky has definitely changed now, the blackness fading to a deep blue along the horizon, the stars in that direction growing faint, as if they are being washed away by an invisible tide. You stare at the horizon, watching for the first sign of light, and you feel a small flutter of something that might be hope or might just be relief. The change is slow, almost imperceptible, but it is real, and you know that the dawn has begun. The longest part of the night is over, the deepest darkness has passed, and the return of light is no longer a promise, but a process already underway. You take a deep breath, the cold air filling your lungs, and you let it out slowly, watching the cloud of vapor rise and dissipate. You stamp your feet one more time, the sound creaking through the snow, and you pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The watch is not over yet, but the end is in sight, and that knowledge gives you the strength to stand a little straighter and keep your eyes open a little longer. You think about the fox and the mouse and the owl, all of them somewhere in the darkness or in their dens, and you think about how they will sense the dawn too, how they will begin to stir and prepare for the day. You are not alone in waiting for the light. The whole world is waiting with you, patient and quiet and still. A single bird calls from somewhere in the forest, a short clear note that repeats every few seconds, the first voice of the morning chorus. You do not recognize the bird by its call, but you know what it means. The night is retreating, the day is advancing, and the balance of the world is shifting. Another bird answers from a different part of the forest, a higher note that overlaps with the first, and then a third bird joins in, and soon a soft chorus fills the morning air. A gentle music that rises and falls like waves on a shore. You listen to the birds, and you feel the tiredness lift slightly, replaced by a quiet alertness that comes from knowing the end is near. The eastern sky has turned from blue to grey, and the grey is lightening by the minute, spreading across the horizon like water seeping into dry cloth. The stars have disappeared except for the brightest few, and the shapes of the trees have become clear and solid instead of dark suggestions. You can see the snow on the ground turning from silver to white, the colors returning to the world as the light grows. You look at your own hands, still covered in mittens, and you can see the individual threads of the wool, the small imperfections in the weaving, the places where your aunt stitched a patch over a worn spot. The light is still dim, but it is enough, and it is growing. You hear movement inside the longhouse, someone stirring on their sleeping bench, the rustle of straw and the creak of wooden slats. A voice mumbles something, too low for you to make out the words, and then there is silence again before another voice answers. The Longhouse is waking up. Slowly and reluctantly, the sleepers pulled from their dreams by the same growing light that has reached your eyes. You take a step toward the door, not because your watch is over, but because you want to be closer to the warmth when it opens, and then you stop yourself and step back to your position. The watch is not over until the relief guard arrives, and you will not abandon your post even for a moment. The sky continues to brighten, the grey turning to pale pink along the very edge of the horizon, the first hint of the sun's colours, even though the sun itself is still hidden behind the trees. The pink spreads and deepens, mixing with the grey to create a soft lavender that fades into blue higher up. You've seen this transition many times, but it never fails to move you. The way the darkness gives way so gracefully to the light, the way the world is reborn every morning without any effort or struggle. The night fought nothing. It simply ended, and the day began, and that is the way of things. The Longhouse door opens, and Eric steps out, stretching his arms above his head and yawning widely. He is wearing his cloak and his boots, and he has a wool scarf wrapped around his neck, and he looks sleepy but functional. He walks over to where you are standing, his feet crunching in the snow, and he holds out his hand for your spear. You hand it to him, and he takes it and leans it against the gatepost, and then he hands you a piece of warm bread and a fresh cup of broth. He says something that you do not quite hear because your ears are numbed by cold, but you nod and smile and take the bread and the cup. You walk toward the Longhouse door, but you pause for a moment to look back at the clearing one last time. The untouched snow stretches from the wall to the tree line. The dark trees stand against the brightening sky. The soft curl of smoke rises from the roof hole, and the birds are singing their morning song. You take a deep breath, the cold air tasting of snow and pine and the promise of warmth, and then you duck inside. The heat hits you like a wave, the smell of smoke and wool and sleeping bodies filling your nose, and you find a spot near the fire where you can sit and rest. The embers are still warm, and you stretch your hands toward them, feeling the heat soak into your frozen fingers, and you close your eyes and let the day begin. The change comes slowly, so slowly that you almost miss it. But then you notice that the stars in the eastern sky have faded from bright points to faint smudges, and the blackness overhead has taken on a hint of deep blue along the horizon. You watch as the blue lightens to grey, as the tree line becomes a sharp silhouette against the growing brightness, instead of a vague dark shape, as the snow on the ground changes from silver to white under the first true light of approaching dawn. The transformation is gradual, almost imperceptible moment by moment, but when you blink and look again, the world is noticeably different, softer and clearer and more alive than it was a few minutes ago. You have been standing at the gate for what feels like an eternity, but has really been only one night, one ordinary winter night, no different from dozens you have guarded before. Yet this night feels different because you have lived through it completely, from the first hour when the snow began to fall, to this final hour when the light returns and you have done your duty without faltering. Your body aches and your feet are numb and your eyes sting from the cold, but you are awake and alert and the Longhouse is safe, and that is all that matters. You take a deep breath, the cold air filling your lungs, and you let it out slowly, watching the cloud of vapor rise and disappear into the pale morning sky. A single bird calls from somewhere in the forest, a short, clear note that repeats every few seconds, the first voice of the morning chorus breaking the long silence of the night. You do not recognize the bird by its call, but you know what it means. The night is retreating, the day is advancing, and the balance of the world is shifting from darkness to light. Another bird answers from a different part of the forest, a higher note that overlaps with the first, and then a third bird joins in, and soon a soft chorus fills the morning air, a gentle music that rises and falls like waves on a shore or wind through the pines. You listen to the birds and you feel the tiredness lift slightly, replaced by a quiet alertness that comes from knowing the end is near. The grey light continues to brighten, spreading across the horizon like water seeping into dry cloth, and the shapes of the trees become clear and solid instead of dark suggestions. You can see the individual branches of the pines now, the way the snow sits on each one in thick white layers, the way the tips of the lowest branches brush the surface of the deeper drifts. The snow on the ground has turned from silver to white, and you can see the faint blue shadows where the snow is deepest, and the pale yellow glow where the first light touches the open ground. The colors are returning to the world, soft and muted, but unmistakably there after hours of grey and black and silver. You look at your own hands, still covered in the wool mittens your aunt made for you, and you can see the individual threads of the weaving, the small imperfections where the yarn changes thickness, the darker patches where your sweat has soaked into the wool and frozen. The light is still dim, but it is enough to see by, enough to remind you that the world has color and texture and life beyond the simple darkness of the night. You flex your fingers inside the mittens, feeling the stiffness slowly giving way as the cold begins to lose its grip, and you clench and unclench your fists a few times just to feel the movement. The longhouse behind you has begun to stir, the sounds of waking life filtering through the thick log walls. You hear someone coughing, a dry morning cough that goes on for a few seconds before subsiding, and then the rustle of straw bedding as someone sits up and stretches. A child's voice asks a question too quiet for you to hear the words, and an adult's voice answers in a sleepy murmur. The fire must have burned down to almost nothing during the night, because you cannot see any orange glow through the cracks anymore, only the faint grey light of dawn seeping in through the same gaps. Someone will need to add wood soon, to stir the embers and blow on them until the flames catch and grow, to bring the warmth back to the longhouse for the new day. You shift your weight one more time, the snow creaking under your boots, and you listen to the sounds of the waking forest. The birds have grown louder and more numerous, their calls overlapping into a continuous song that fills the air with a gentle noise that is neither loud nor intrusive. Somewhere in the distance you hear the bark of a fox, a sharp yapping sound that carries clearly through the cold morning air. And you wonder if it is the same fox you saw earlier, the one with the red fur and the easy grace. The fox is probably returning to its den after a night of hunting, its belly full and its paws tired, and you feel a kinship with the animal because you too are about to rest after a long night of watching. The eastern sky has turned from grey to pale pink along the very edge of the horizon, the first hint of the sun's colours, even though the sun itself is still hidden behind the trees. The pink spreads and deepens, mixing with the grey, to create a soft lavender that fades into blue higher up, and the clouds that remain catch the light and turn gold at their edges. You have seen this transition many times on other mornings after other watches, but it never fails to catch your attention because it is different every time, the colors shifting and blending in ways you could not predict, the light growing stronger or weaker depending on the clouds and the air and the season. This morning the colors are soft and gentle, like watercolors painted on wet paper, and you stand watching them for a long moment because they are beautiful and because you have earned the right to stop scanning the tree line for a moment and simply look. You hear the longhouse door open behind you, the familiar creak of the wooden latch, and the scrape of the bottom edge against the packed snow of the threshold. You turn your head and see Eric stepping out, the relief guard, a young man with a round face and sleepy eyes and a wool cloak that is too thin for this kind of cold. He stretches his arms above his head and yawns widely, his breath clouding in the morning air, and then he pulls his hood up and walks toward you with the careful steps of someone who is not yet fully awake. His boots leave deep prints in the snow that has accumulated to nearly the height of his ankles, and he stumbles slightly when his foot catches on a hidden lump of ice. Eric reaches you and stands beside you for a moment, looking out at the clearing and the forest and the brightening sky. He does not speak at first, just stands there breathing in the cold air and rubbing his hands together inside his mittens, and you appreciate the silence because you are too tired for conversation. After a while he turns to you and holds out his hand for your spear, and you hand it to him, the wooden shaft smooth and cold against your palm. He takes the spear and leans it against the gate post next to where he will stand for the next several hours, and then he reaches inside his cloak and pulls out a piece of warm bread wrapped in a cloth. The bread is still warm from the hearth, the crust dark and slightly charred in places, the inside soft and steaming when he breaks it in half and hands one piece to you. You take the bread and hold it in your mittened hands, feeling the warmth seep through the wool and into your cold fingers, and you bring it to your nose and smell the grain and the salt and the faint sweetness of the barley. He also hands you a clay cup filled with broth, the same kind the chief's wife brought you earlier, warm and salty and smelling of herbs and lamb bones. You take the cup and drink, the liquid spreading through your chest and down into your stomach, and you feel the cold retreat a little more with each swallow. Eric says something to you, his voice low and rough with sleep, and you think he's asking how the night was. You nod and say it was quiet. Just snow and wind and a few animals, nothing to worry about. He nods back, accepting your report without question, because he trusts you and because the night is over and nothing happened, and that is all anyone needs to know. You finish the broth and hand him back the cup, and you bite into the bread, chewing slowly because your jaw is stiff from the cold and because you want to make the warmth last as long as possible. You look back at the clearing one last time before you go inside. The snow is deep and white and untouched, except for the path you have made with your pacing and the fresh prints Eric made when he walked out from the door. The tree line is clear and sharp against the brightening sky, each pine and birch distinct and individual, their branches heavy with snow that sparkles in the growing light. The sky has turned from pink to gold along the horizon, and the first direct rays of sunlight are beginning to slant through the gaps between the trees, touching the snow with a warmth that you can almost feel from where you stand. The birds are singing loudly now, a chorus of different voices and different songs that blend together into a single celebration of the new day. You turn away from the clearing and walk toward the Longhouse door, your feet heavy and slow, each step a small effort because your muscles have grown stiff from standing in one place for so long. The snow crunches under your boots, a sound that is familiar and satisfying, and you watch your breath cloud in the air in front of your face. The clouds smaller now than they were an hour ago because the temperature has started to rise with the sun. You reach the door and push it open, the wood groaning on its leather hinges, and you step inside. The warmth hits you like a wave, so sudden and so intense that you gasp a little, your lungs adjusting to the change from freezing air to the still warm air of the Longhouse. The room is dim, lit only by the grey light from the smoke hole and the faint red glow of the embers in the central hearth, but you can see the shapes of the sleeping benches along the walls and the bundles of blankets and furs that cover the people still resting. A few people are awake, sitting up on their benches and rubbing their eyes, their hair messy and their faces soft with sleep. The woman who tends the fire is already adding wood to the embers, stacking small sticks in a pyramid and blowing gently until a flame catches and begins to grow. You find an empty spot near the hearth, a place on the packed earth floor where the heat from the fire lingers longest, and you lower yourself down slowly because your legs are tired and your knees are stiff. You sit with your back against a wooden post and your feet stretched out toward the growing flames, and you pull off your mittens and hold your bare hands toward the fire. The heat stings at first, the blood rushing back into your frozen fingers with a tingling that is almost painful, but you endure it because you know the pain will fade and the warmth will remain. You flex your fingers, watching them redden and swell slightly as the circulation returns, and you curl and uncurl them until the tingling subsides and they feel like your own hands again. The fire grows stronger as the woman adds more wood, the flames climbing up through the sticks and catching the larger logs, and the warmth spreads through the Longhouse, pushing back the cold that crept in during the night. You can feel the heat on your face and your hands and your chest, and you close your eyes for a moment and let it soak into your bones. The cold that has been your companion for so many hours, finally loosening its grip and retreating. You are not warm yet, not truly warm, but you are no longer cold, and that is enough for now. Someone hands you a bowl of porridge, the oats thick and creamy and sweetened with a little honey, and you take it in your hands and eat slowly, savoring each mouthful. The porridge is warm and filling, and you can feel the energy spreading through your body as your stomach digests the grain and the honey. You finish the bowl and set it aside, and someone hands you a cup of water that is not frozen, and you drink that too. the water cool and clean and refreshing after the saltiness of the broth and the dried meat. The Longhouse is waking up around you, people sitting up on their benches and pulling on their tunics and boots, children running to the fire to warm their hands, adults starting to talk about the day ahead. The chief is sitting in his high-backed chair near the fire, his bad legs stretched out toward the flames, and he nods at you when he sees you sitting against the post. His nod is small, but it carries meaning. Thank you for your service. Thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you for standing in the cold while we slept. You nod back, a small acknowledgement that you did your duty and that you would do it again. You lean your head back against the post and close your eyes, not to sleep, but to rest, to let your body recover from the long night. The fire crackles in front of you, a soft sound that is comforting and familiar, and the voices of the people around you rise and fall in the easy rhythm of ordinary conversation. You can smell the porridge and the wood smoke and the wool of the blankets and the leather of the boots, all the smells of a waking Longhouse on a winter morning. Outside, the snow is deep and white and the sun is rising over the tree line and the birds are still singing and the world is beginning another ordinary day. You do not need to be anywhere or do anything for the next several hours. Your watch is over, your duty is done, and you have earned the right to sit by the fire and rest. The cold will still be there when you go outside again, and the snow will still be falling on other nights, and you will stand guard again, because that is your role in the life of the Longhouse. But for now, in this moment, you are warm and safe and among your people, and the darkness of the night is just a memory that will fade as the morning brightens. You open your eyes and look at the fire, at the flames dancing and crackling, and you let yourself feel the warmth without hurry. The night is over. The watch is complete. You can rest.